The Battlefield 1 Incursions Mode has been in development for quite a while now. It debuted at Gamescom 2017 on the Giant Shadow map, and it received a generally good response from the gaming press and players who got a chance to play it there. Now, over the months since that point, a small team within the DICE studio has been steadily working on the experience. They've added new maps into the mix, they've added new game modes, they've made tweaks to gameplay and balance, and just in the last couple of days, the experience has now launched onto the consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One. Now, to me, that signalled the Incursions experience was reaching a rather major milestone in its development. If the developers felt confident enough to push the experience live on other platforms, that shows they feel it's in a good position. The experience is still labelled as in development, and therefore it's not a true representation of the final product, but it's a major milestone to launch the experience on other platforms. I thought then it was a perfect chance for me to evaluate the progress the team has really made from my own perspective. This is somebody who isn't a competitive Battlefield player, somebody who isn't the best at the normal Battlefield game in the first place, and somebody who plays Battlefield more so for that large-scale multiplayer experience. So keep that in mind when I give my feedback here. And just before I get into that feedback, I want to make it clear to you guys watching this video, I know this version of Incursions is still in testing, I know it's still in development, and we'll most likely see some more changes as time goes on, and that's a good thing. I think it does need some more work. I'm trying to evaluate it from a point of view, however, as if this was a brand new module being added to Battlefield, as I'm sure it will be for Battlefield 2018. I'm trying to judge it as if this were the finished product. As I've just said, I still think Incursions needs some work for it to become a bit better. Okay then, let's dig into this. The first and most immediately noticeable difference between Incursions and standard Battlefield 1 is the pacing and atmosphere. There's just this sense of emptiness in the matches that I played. 5v5 is for sure the accepted blueprint for competitive FPS events, but in Battlefield games, I think we're used to seeing a lot more players than 5v5 in most matches, and therefore it's quite a stark jump to come from a 64-man server running a conquest game mode to Incursions, where there are just 10 people populating the entire map. The maps are quiet and they lack a sense of theatre that I think Battlefield almost requires in a multiplayer environment. I will say this, however, interactions between players feel a lot more focused and clean, which is a positive reason for only having 10 players populating the map at any one time. Battlefield's total chaos in standard gameplay can sometimes lead to some rather sketchy moments in multiplayer, but here, with the obvious focus being the objective and stopping the other team from taking the lead, most players I played with and against had the mindset that they had a job to do and they needed to remain focused for the entirety of the match, and that was a great scenario to be part of. The overall gameplay of Incursions is almost identical to that of standard Battlefield, but it's the setting that you're spawning into that I think needs the work. There's still a huge amount of space on the maps, which spreads out the gameplay a little bit too much sometimes. And of course that space is to accommodate the vehicle kits that you can take advantage of. But perhaps there's some room in this testing phase for Incursions to try 5v5 without the vehicles. If a player decides to use a vehicle, your team loses 20% of their infantry, at the expense of a powerful vehicle I might add, but I think that massively slows down the gameplay. The enemy team is likely to play a lot more defensively whilst that vehicle is active, so much so that in certain times when I was playing, all of that tension that was currently going on was almost lost. This is an area that I think DICE may need to do a little bit more work on. Moving on to game modes and maps now, because I want to talk about an area where I think DICE has done a really good job overall. The 3 different game modes on 3 different maps have throughout the life of Incursions given the devs ample opportunity to collect data and feedback from players on what works best and what doesn't work so well. But I think it's their most recent addition, which is a slightly modified Amiens map, playing a game mode called Squad Breakthrough, which I think is the best of the lot. It's an easy to understand game mode set in an urban environment, which is an environment I think Battlefield flourishes and can be at its best, and that leads to good overall gameplay and interaction between the two teams. 3 sectors are set out for the attacking team to capture from the defenders, and of course the defenders need to halt that advance and run down the clock. To put it simply, it's just a scaled down version of operations from standard Battlefield 1, and I'm totally on board with it. Viewing the experience as well, I imagine, would be fairly good. The ease of understanding means the viewer can simply focus on the action without having to work out a complicated scoring system, with points being handed out for various actions that sometimes that viewer won't even be able to see because the live stream isn't showing the right point of view. Players on the map have their kits to use and simply have to attack or defend objectives. It's a classic Battlefield game mode scaled down to a 5v5 scenario, and I think it works quite nicely. I've also played the Sinai Desert Redux map in the King of the Hill game mode, and Giant Shadow Redux with a modified conquest system, both of which were okay, but nowhere near as fun as the one on Amiens. All of the maps have been modified in some way to suit the game mode that they're hosting, and I think that's a very smart move from the development team. Battlefield 1 is not inherently a competitively focused game, and the maps are suited far more to that large-scale combat that we're used to seeing. So having bespoke map modifications for these modes within Incursions is definitely the right way to go. I would like to make a point, however, with Incursions almost certainly to be included in the next Battlefield game, I should mention that this method that DICE is using here, modifying existing maps to suit a single game mode, I don't think that will be received well in a brand new game. It's fine for Battlefield 1 because this whole competitive project started after the main game released. Of course, you can't focus on something that you weren't even aware was going to exist 12 months down the line. But for your brand new title in the franchise, I think it would be wise to make sure that areas of each map that's going to be supported by Incursions have an area built into it that can be used for Incursions right out of the gate, rather than having to make modifications after the fact. Were that not to happen, it would almost be public admission that this entire competitive venture didn't really pan out properly and would just look a little bit more than mildly embarrassing when you compare it to other titles that already are large and popular in the competitive scene. Next, I wanted to go over the specific kits that DICE has put in place for Incursions. Right now, these kits represent the loadout system for Incursions, and if you look at the loadout system in the main game of Battlefield 1 and then the one we have in Incursions, they don't match up, and they offer vastly different experiences for the player. That can be a little bit jarring to begin with, and more so when you start to progress your kit during rounds, unlocking different abilities for that kit. These abilities run in the same vein as specializations in the main game, but again, they don't mirror them and offer different options to the player depending on what kit you take. Therefore, you have the same game, Battlefield 1, offering 2 totally different loadout systems in different game modes that you can play. That doesn't quite sit right when you look at it from afar, but when you start playing Incursions, the kits make total sense. The kits that you can choose from in Incursions, they channel a player to be as effective as possible at specific tasks and actions during a match. For example, if you pick the Trench Surgeon kit, it's your job to hand out the meds like there's no tomorrow and revive fallen teammates. If you pick the Proximity Recon, you need to be looking out for enemies all the time and using your decoy head gadget to spot enemy players. Each of the kits is designed to do something specific, and it's vital you follow that in order for your team to succeed, or at least be as good as it can be. Now, I think this setup is a great step to improving team play overall, which of course is extremely important in a competitive scenario, and even more important when matchmaking into games with random people you've probably never met or even played with before. In organised events or matches between 2 teams, that emphasis is not as important as each player on the team knows the others, and therefore can likely work together no matter what kit they end up choosing. However, when you zoom back out again and look at the bigger picture, standard Battlefield 1 alongside Incursions for Battlefield 1, you can see the rift in the two systems again. And I'm sure a lot of other people, maybe people that don't even play Battlefield, are starting to pay attention to what is happening for their competitive module. And if they're comparing it to the base game, I think you're seeing a lot of, well, your base game doesn't do it, but your competitive version does. Therefore, is your game even suited to a competitive environment? You have freedom of choice in standard Battlefield 1 versus structure and almost forced team play focus in Incursions. Now, if DICE could somehow marry those two systems together, all the while keeping player choice available for everybody and team play focus at the forefront, I think they'd have a solution to the issue of players not playing the objective and having the choice to do what they want to do that's been missing from the last few titles. Now, that's an extremely difficult middle ground to find, however, but the implementation of kits into Incursions does 100% elevate the experience and makes it much, much more focused. All of the things that I've just spoken about, in my opinion, proves that DICE is on the right track with Incursions. But I'd like to offer up a couple of points now where I think DICE needs to do some further work. And these, I think, are merely issues to do with an in-development environment and things not quite being finished yet. Firstly, there are a few bugs and glitches with the player models right now. There's a heavy mismatch in the third-person reload animations and the point at which that model starts firing back at you. A few times during my matches the other evening, I was killed by a player who appeared to be mid-reload of their weapon, based on their third-person animations, only for them to start firing bullets in my direction. I know Battlefield 3 severely suffered with that problem as well. I may be being slightly harsh here, but you cannot have bugs like that in a competitive mode, where every single move you make is vital to your team's performance. If I decide to react differently to a scenario because of a bug like this and then I die, that's not okay. Secondly, the advanced spotting system DICE has added to Incursions in the games I played wasn't being utilised to its fullest extent. After an hour or so of gameplay, I became comfortable with it, but with 3 different options to choose based on what you're trying to spot, that could slow down the player trying to communicate something to their team. Now, I don't really have a solution to this, it's just a point that I noticed, but considering most of the players I played with didn't actually use it, I could argue, is it really needed? It's certainly an improvement over the insanely powerful spotting in standard Battlefield 1. It uses a last known location system instead of a fully employed 3D spotting system, but perhaps DICE needs to take another look at it. And lastly, I think the flow of the match outside of gameplay, as in the half-time segments and draft processes, need to be adjusted and shortened. Half-time is way too long right now, and a lot of the tension that was going on in gameplay just before half-time was called is immediately lost and rarely regained once the second half starts. The match has to warm up again before you get any of that back. It also adds to that empty feeling I mentioned earlier, disjointed parts of gameplay where action increases and then just falls off a cliff. DICE need to tighten up the match flow with respect to out-of-gameplay elements in order to keep that tension and atmosphere running at a good level. Overall, I enjoyed the time I spent playing Incursions, but there are still a few hurdles that DICE needs to jump over before it's ready for the prime time. Ultimately, it's the Battlefield and gaming communities that will decide the fate of Incursions both now and in the future. Competitive gaming and esports thrive off an active and engaged audience, and I'm just not currently convinced that what DICE has created is really going to take off in that area. I'd love to be proven wrong, however, because there's no doubting that having an active competitive scene for a game really helps boost its profile and grows its community over time. You only need to look at games like Rocket League, Overwatch, and Rainbow Six Siege for evidence of that. But thank you very much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop it a like, and of course, if you didn't like the video, you're welcome to dislike it as well. And make sure you leave all of your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments section. Subscribe for more videos like this, and click the notification bell to turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my future videos. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.